In a time of rising unrest, when borders dominate headlines and immigration policy shapes the future of our nation, the truth matters. From the front lines of law enforcement, national security, and public policy, this is Frontline Facts, where rhetoric is stripped away, where politics takes a back seat, and where facts, hard, documented facts, lead the conversation. As instability grows beyond our southern border, as communities feel the impact at home, we bring you informed voices. Attorneys, senior law enforcement leaders, policy experts, and professionals who understand the law, the protocols, and the consequences. This isn't opinion. This isn't spin. This is clarity in a time of confusion. This is Frontline Facts, and the conversation starts now.
Welcome to Frontline Facts with Luisa Deason, where we correct the rhetoric on immigration issues and public policy. In today's episode, we have a special guest, Mr. Michael McMahon. He was the Assistant Special Agent in charge in the Houston office and also had a number of other titles, but spent decades working on the enforcement of immigration statutes for the federal government in several different locations. Mike, welcome to the show.
Well, thank you. Appreciate you having me on.
Well, one of the things that I want to kind of lay out is, you and I have known each other for a very long time. In fact, you were my former boss, and I know that you and Tom worked together. In fact, I believe you said at one point that you all had gone through the Border Patrol Academy together. Is that correct?
Probably not the same class, but we certainly went there at different times. I was in the 106. I think Tom was a class behind me, but we have very similar backgrounds.
Well, so to give people a perspective of your knowledge base and why it's important to correct the rhetoric, that's why we're here today, is give me a little bit of your background and where you started and how you ended up in Houston. And of course, now you're retired, but let's go over a little bit of your background so we can establish who you are and what you have brought to the table as far as immigration enforcement.
Right. Grew up in Fort Worth, Texas, and from there went off to college and eventually went to the Border Patrol Academy, which I graduated from. And then in 1975, I entered on duty at my first point was in Douglas, Arizona as a Border Patrol agent. Served there, 5-6 years. Went off to the Virgin Islands as an inspector, examiner, to Puerto Rico as an investigator, and then various stops along the way. We had, as you know, back then, or maybe you don't, your audience doesn't, but we had the Cuban crisis that interrupted things in this country for 2 to 3 years while we took care of that mass that were coming in. And then from there, we went to a variety of places, mostly as investigators, staff positions. And I spent a total of 33 and a half years with the service, promoted to the deputy director in Houston, went to region. I came back, did a number of things, and then I retired as the director of investigations at the time of the merger in 2003 when we put everything together. So I have a long history of INS and how we got to where we're at today, and also employer sanctions, some of those things that I can fill in the blanks for if you need me to.
Well, yeah, and I started with the service back in INS when you had come down. I believe I started in 1998. So we were still under the umbrella of the U.S. Immigration and Naturalization Service. We were all under DOJ at the time.
Correct.
And of course, what propelled that and kind of put us on the fast track to then become one of 22 different government agencies under DHS, Department of Homeland Security, was 9/11.
Right.
But let's go back into some of the things. You did start out with a variety of different places where you did a lot of very important work. But I met you in Houston. And so let's kind of pick up in the Houston area and what you did for them. You came in as the ADDI, which is the Investigations Deputy Director of or Assistant.
It's the Director of Investigations. You're the Assistant Director, but you're the Director of Investigations.
So you came in and you actually supervised how many different divisions and what exactly was your role under that role in Houston?
Well, like all good supervisors and managers, we didn't have enough in the city of Houston. We had 75 persons for our area, and that's including support staff and all. When the merger happened, we realized that the U.S. Customs Service, for pretty much the same area, had 200 investigators plus. So we were smallish, as it were, for the type of work we did and for the location itself.
Well, and one of the things that you and I worked was very high profile cases. The advantage that Houston had is that it's the first largest city, although it's the fourth largest in the country, but
Right.
the fourth the first you come across with the transportation mechanism to, make it easy for not only drug trafficking, but also child trafficking, human smuggling. And people don't really understand the difference between trafficking and smuggling. But we also did document fraud cases and things of that nature, which was highlight some of the high case profiles that you did while you were here. And of course, you and I probably worked many of those together.
Well, the highest case, as you know and recall, because it's too hard to forget. Tom Holman actually cites it from time to time when he talks about it. It was a Victoria case where that tragic accident where 19 people perished in the back of a tractor trailer truck. And I remember being called late at night. Again, that would be normal. I would have been head of investigations by a member of the U.S. Attorney's Office who said they had relayed the case to me and said, because of the INS involvement, they had tried to get HPD to assist them, but they wouldn't. I didn't know a lot about the case, but they told me the specifics. They were tracing a phone call to a hospital in Houston. So I got on the phone about 3 o'clock in the morning and started asking people who was waiting, if they could give me a description, who was waiting in their rooms to be serviced. And when I got to this one hospital, they told me that, well, we have a man here who keeps telling about seeing these bodies and seeing them. I said, well, hold on to him as best you can. I'll have an agent there very shortly. And that was, in fact, the driver of the tractor trailer.
Well, and I remember that case because you called me at 6 a.m. or 7 a.m. to tell me to go to the office.
Right.
I remember that. That was Tyrone Williams. He was the driver. He was a Jamaican national. And what had happened is he had actually, what was it? The estimate was about 89 illegal aliens in the back of that sweltering tractor trailer coming up from Victoria to Houston in May.
Oh, at
And of
least, yeah.
course, at least, and we know those temperatures rise, and that's a big, big risk for people trying to smuggle others in to the country. But the problem was he didn't use the refrigeration in the back of that sweltering tractor trailer. So there was 19 people who perished, as you well know, and amongst
Right.
them was that 5-year-old that everybody was so concerned about.
And his dad was clinging to him when they found him, when they opened the doors and they burst out of the trailer and fell. All of them had perished. A very bad sense. What I remember you, and I don't want too far off track here, but you and I then had to create a story on the internet to locate these family members without specific IDs of the bodies, and yet try to attract this person, even some that were in the country illegally, to come forward to identify the victim for us. Very, very good work on your part. Very trying, as I remember.
Well, and I remember just the families coming into the conference rooms, and you were sitting there. We were letting them identify family members through pictures of the deceased, and they were then having to go down to the morgue and identify the bodies. But this was just very, very tragic. But I think this is it. In fact, you and your all of your agents worked this incredibly hard, and it was not only at the time, I believe, the largest smuggling case we had with that many deaths, which put us on the map.
Well, it was the
But
first smuggler tried, and with the possibility of capital punishment.
that's true. I do recall that. Now tell me a little bit about what took place. I mean, how do you deal with that many deaths, and how do you deal with the US Attorney's Office on a case like that? And of course, dealing with the relatives or the people that were in the side of that sweltering tractor trailer that did survive. A lot of them I know were kept back or as witnesses. And I know that the US Attorney at the time might have been Mike Shelby.
He was great prosecutor. We miss him. The process of dealing with any smuggling case, trafficking case, is you have to identify through interview what happened, what the facts were, who got you here, who got you there, what place was. In this case, we had a lot of people that fled the scene when it was first stopped. The law enforcement had to try to identify how many there were. Do a number of agencies doing flyovers and try to find them that had fled to the bush. And in doing some, I think we recovered more or less about 90 persons that were involved. Could have been more, could have been less, but from those, we began going backwards. How did you get on? Who put you in the truck? That kind of thing. And so you have to develop it. And through that, you identify your best witnesses that will be available for trial.
Well, and we also, because we were seeking the death penalty, had to be extremely careful about releasing very early information. So, the PR aspect of, and you've always been very, very good at giving interviews and just, you just know your material inside and out. But it was very easy to work with you because, we both kind of were on the same page as far as we don't want to release a whole bunch of information.
Right.
You still need to get the investigation going, and you need to make sure that you've overturned every rock and discovered more data to be able to put the pieces together and have a successful prosecution. After all, this was a case that would have been what the first case the Immigration Service
President.
had tried to
Right.
put forth for the death penalty.
Exactly. And if you remember, Luis, I know it's time passes, but during that investigation, we identified a smuggler that not only placed persons on that truck that then perished, but also was responsible for the Denison 11 case that was found in Denison, Iowa, had been abandoned for 4 months, and the mummified remains of 11 persons were found in that one as well.
Now, were they in a tractor trailer or were they in a
They
train?
were in a train car, but the train had been put off on a track. Not know the particulars of that, but it had been there dormant for 4 months. Obviously, the persons perished and the mummified remains were identified, but it was through those interview processes that we identified that smuggler that was responsible for that.
Well, and this is pretty much par for the course. They've never taken any value into the human commodity. It's a commodity to them, it's not a human life. Now, describe to me what you've learned throughout your career. What have been the patterns? What do you follow when you're looking at smuggling? And what have been some other cases that have been very, very big?
Well, smuggling, we testified a lot on this. And I'll get into why Houston is really known for this, not just the size of their immigrant communities, but by the numerous immigrant communities. People don't know that, and this may have changed within the last 10, 15 years, but Houston was the third largest representative for foreign consular corps outside of Washington, outside of New York. We had the largest number. Now that meant we had a number of entities here that were doing business with the U.S. Oil, medicine, certainly all of those, but it allowed the immigrants, illegal in this case, to funnel into these neighborhoods before they then departed for other parts of the United States. And very famously in Houston, the camioneta was developed as a means to do that.
That was the van cases, weren't they? The
Yeah.
camionetas?
Yes,
Yes.
all over the country.
Well, and that was a mechanism that they use and disperse to different states. We have a mutual friend that was working at Channel 13 at the time. I don't know if you remember that, but he had been
do.
traveling with some of these camioneta companies and distributing and dropping off illegal aliens throughout state lines, crossing state lines. And, we had a run in with him and said, we need your footage and we need to talk to you. Otherwise, we were looking at sending some agents down to your office for prosecution.
I remember very well because unfortunately they were uncontrolled because of the size of the van, the number of persons. So they were getting in several wrecks around the country where the entire van would perish, and then they would trace it all back to Houston. And we started a number of cases, but at any one time there might have been 75 to 100 camioneta cases operating out of Houston. That was a very big hub for that.
Now, so we put this into perspective. Give me a little bit of information about the different nationalities. I know that it's been a lot of years, but Mexican nationals that were coming in and being smuggled in certainly didn't pay the same price as what we called the exotics or the special interest aliens. Describe some of that to me.
Well, what has changed? I'll back up a little bit. You initially asked me what has changed, not just, but what has changed in the smuggling industry is all is that as the border has tightened down over the years, certainly zero products today, then the price of entering into the country illegal has risen, and so have the dangers. But to do that, then the price, for example, now this was 18 years ago the last time I worked it, but a Chinese national arriving in Houston, that wasn't their final destination. That's where the price went. All of them have to go through New York at some point. That was anywhere from $45,000 to $60,000 a person, and there were no shortage of takers.
Well, and then we had the Thai female cases where they were being smuggled in for the purpose of prostitution, and I think that they were paying close to 80,000.
Yes,
And that was atrocious.
and then they had to work off that debt as well. So yes, it was.
Well, let's go into a little bit farther, and I know I remember watching the footage on the news with the open border under the Biden administration, and that was just absolutely heart-wrenching and horrifying, knowing that nobody was being vetted and that our men and women, our Border Patrol men and women in green had been pulled completely off the front lines of defense, and they were processing illegal aliens that had COVID and other diseases that we had eventually eradicated, but we'd never seen those kinds of numbers. Now, you started out with the Border Patrol, Mike. Tell me a little bit about what kind of numbers you saw throughout your career, and then, of course, prior to the Biden administration, and what it looked like to you. I know how horrified I was, but tell us what you think, what happened.
Well, in my opinion, it's nothing short of criminal. And someday, maybe someone will pursue that in some venue. But when I began in the Border Patrol, we act as the U.S. does as a pressure valve to relieve these workers coming here. Money flows back. Individuals provide work on this end. So it was give and take. You kept it under control. Douglas, Arizona, 1975. I was a group of 6 assigned to the station at that time out of training to bring the total number to 20 agents. We counted for 700 to 800 apps a month. Fast forward 5 years ago, it exploded. There are 2,100 agents in Douglas, Arizona, in that area, and they accounted for, in the peak of these times, over 1,500 apps a day. So
That's insane. That's
Yeah.
just sheer insanity. And you can't properly screen everybody, and you can't certainly do the medical testing and all of the things that are required. But the biggest part of that fraud and that criminal activity was the fact that it was catch and release. So you have no idea who you're releasing. And
No.
of course, you would know as well as I know how many of those people actually show up to their court dates. And if the court date is 5 years later, how many do you think of the 25 estimated illegal aliens that entered under the 4 years of the Biden administration actually qualified for asylum?
Oh, I don't know. 5, maybe 10%. And that's totally of it. All countries. Certainly the ones that are coming here. I came under that mass flow from Venezuela, from this. Just ridiculous what they were doing there. Again, in my opinion, as the next officer, that was criminal.
Well, and let's talk a little bit about moving forward. Now, when you and I worked together, the 287G was something that was implemented. We had agreements with local and state jails. And so it was a very different environment. The fight has always been, well, we don't want to do the immigration agents' work. But in fact, they do collaborate with other entities and other law enforcement agencies, both at state and local, state and federal. So what do you think has been the vitriol against ICE? And is it that just people don't like Trump, or I mean, what has changed? Because this is a program that's been around for a long time.
Well, hasn't always been accepted here in Houston. Now we tried with, along with the state, as you know, our function up there. But here, I believe the function was discontinued by the current sheriff. And I know that sheriff was as well nominated, I believe, to be the head of ICE at one point in time. But I believe that had to do with this. The reason he didn't get the job is because, in my opinion, it's a no-brainer. The federal government comes in and provides training to an X number of officers you designate to take care of this. Now, every jail has problems with not just staffing, but with housing and overcrowding and things like that. Here's a relief mechanism. Here's a way to offset some of those expenses and some of the work and some of the bodies to an agency. You want to keep the agencies away from your neighborhood? Look, keep them in your jails. They've already come in contact with the law enforcement officer. Why you wouldn't entertain or utilize 287G is ridiculous.
Well, and wasn't it almost a requirement after 9/11 to allow those agents and do the work inside the jails?
Yes, it was. Unfortunately, not everyone received that well enough. And uh, Harris County. Now, again, it's been several years since I've been on the job there, but Harris County took in almost 900 prisoners a day. In some capacity, they operated multiple courts from early morning till mid-morning, late at night, 24 hours a day. So staffing, keeping all that processing up, where we have to have agents come in and do that, is as time consuming. It's much easier if you have a system that identifies the foreign born, and your system, 287G, allows you to access that.
Well,
Again,
and you look at Minnesota and you think, my God, if had there been any collaboration whatsoever, I don't think that would have been avoidable. Plus, controlling who's coming in and the paid agitators. But what do you think happened in Houston that we were able to escape that kind of a scenario? Because that could happen in anybody's backyard.
well, I have to go back a little bit to tell you about how Houston evolved. Now, I've been here a little longer than you have, but we were known as an amnesty town way back in the 80s under Whitmire. Now, when Kathy had that, and then Lee Brown was the chief, I would come down at them and later in the 80s, and I'd go on the circuit with them, particularly Chief Brown, and we'd go around and talk about the goods and bad of amnesty. Why not arrest? Why call the police? Why do this? And during that time, we all have, in police work, they'll tell you, doesn't matter who you belong to, but you have people that you contact in other agencies that assist you, and you do the same for them. That's how that works. That's how you keep everything going. In Houston, they had a great connection through the Chicano squad. I think you remember me talking to you about that. And subsequently, I had a president of the Houston Police Officers Union come to me. I'll identify him here. I wouldn't at the time because he went on to do great things. His name's Gary Blankenship. And Gary went on to become the U.S. Marshal here in Houston. So he did all right by himself, but he made it very clear. He says, I know the mayor, we have this policy, but we want to assure you as part of the officers that we're there for you and we hope you're there for us. And we said, we can continue to do business informally like this, but we do not intend not to call you if we have something. You think of the smuggling cases, you think of the assaults, all of that, they're interconnected. So you have to work together to resolve these things. And having something for the officers to hang on their belt, they don't want to be immigration officers. They made that very clear. But
the 287G really doesn't highlight what you're deputizing them to make the calls and reach out to you and cooperate, maybe
Right.
secure the perimeter. It's never to have them carry the badge and do the work that the immigration officers do.
no,
But
but it evolved to
that's been an
that.
ongoing fight for years.
Well, that evolved to it. But in the initial one, HPD, I can give you all kinds of scenarios, but let's say they had a reason to lock up someone that was illegal that kept coming around it. It was at every drug scene. There was everything. They didn't have enough. They wanted that extra access on their belt to say, hey, INS, can you do anything for me here? Can you put a hold on it? And we would do that. And that's how those things get along. And that's how it should work. There's nothing wrong with it. They're involved in criminal activity and they need to be stopped.
Well, it's better than sending out 20 agents to the last known address, which is what happened in Minnesota, and trying to find them when they're now with their compadres, probably with drugs and guns and all kinds of things. And it's just an unsecure environment, not just for the agents, but for the community and for the aliens. So I want to move a little bit forward and discuss
Sure.
something that has really impacted the way that the jail system has worked here with some of the bail bondsmen. And I know the president of the bail bondsmen, Mario Garza. And one of the things that, that's been up for, I guess they're trying to push. I know that some of the local legislation is trying to re-push this decree back out, but it's the O'Donnell decree. And my understanding is that was really created many, many decades ago to help the indigent community who couldn't bail out. And, then it was supposed to just do something to help them with just misdemeanor cases and alleviate the system. Then what do you think has happened now? Because I get word from some of the people that are reporting stuff to me to report to ICE, and they're saying that that decree is being dishonored in the fact that now we have illegal aliens taking advantage of that and cases are being dismissed. And these are felons that are now taking advantage of that and being released under, violent domestic violence cases and accusations of murder and rape and all kinds of things. So that has to definitely change.
I would say it would. Now, fortunately, I didn't work under that, Luisa. When I was involved, we practiced almost across the board there. If you're here in illegal status, you were detained automatically. You've already established the fact that you're not going to obey the rules. You're not going to do what you're supposed to. You're not going to report when you want to. Why in the world would we let you out on bail? I'm sorry, but I hope that doesn't go any further. And I hope we're successful in challenging that.
Well, it looks like there's a lot of push now. Just look at the situation this last weekend with Whitmire and, making a change in the vote. And, you had 12-5 in city council voting against, cooperation with ICE. And I'm thinking, what legal stance do they have to even make that decision?
I agree.
I mean, do they have any legal clout? I mean, as far as I've learned through the years, is you don't tell the federal government how to come in and conduct immigration law. I mean, it's federal immigration statutes.
Well, we could break down other agencies and funding mechanisms, but generally, if the federal government's going to fund something, they want X, Y, Z to happen. And they're telling, okay, you're not going to do this. Well, we're not going to fund you then. So I don't think that's unusual at all. I can cite several other agencies that do it now.
Well, and, one of the things that happened is obviously 9/11.
Right.
Nobody can get around that. We all remember where we were. But I do remember you calling me and saying, we've cleared the building. And then, of course, the dignitaries coming through the airport, flying, driving in or doing whatever. There were an aircraft in the sky. You could have heard a pin needle drop on the floor at the airport. It was very, very eerie. And I don't know if you were on some of those tours with those dignitaries, but I'd never seen an airport completely shut and not an aircraft in the sky.
Well, that's where we called on our Border Patrol partners to come up and give us a hand. And Del Rio sector reported and took over the airports in Houston.
Well, let me ask you this. I mean, you've had cases where you've also dealt with, people that have come in that are Chinese. You've done a lot with the 1986, I believe, was that when all the Chinese immigrated here, or they came in under asylum, or there's certain major pieces of legislation you've been a part of.
Well, IRCA was a big piece, and that was 1986. That involved employer sanctions, obviously. Going forward, then you had deportation approval, you had Title III back up in 1990. A lot of legislation passed over the years, depending on what nationality or how we treat Cuban nationals. The Cuban crisis didn't really hit Houston a lot, but it did everyone else, because we had 10,000 Cubans still in jail in this country a year after they arrived. So he let loose the masses, and not all of them were good people.
Well, and a lot of them have spent, the review process, but they've spent so much time in detention that they
Right.
really go back out once released, and they come back in because they don't know what to do. They've never seen a cell phone. Many of them have incarcerated for a very long time.
Well, I could tell you stories about the Cubans. I mean, I lived it for 14 months. Oh, I even was selected to hop aboard a Coast Guard vessel as the lead, intercept a vessel coming out of Nicaragua with 260 Cubans on it, sail it back to Nicaragua, where we were going to be placed to rest. Lots of stories come out of the Cubans, but the bottom line is that even the Cubans that wanted to go home, we have a treaty that says they couldn't, and so we ended up keeping them. Only 111 eventually got returned, and I can tell you, thousands wanted to go back, but they weren't taking them. Seems like
Well,
it's been a
and,
long
and
one.
back to that 9/11, it was, that was
Oh, yeah.
1986, and the Cubans, we do have the second largest Cuban population. I think Miami's obviously first, but let's talk about the 4 years under Biden, where I think most people are missing out on what really came in. A lot of people's misconception is, well, it was just Mexicans or just Central Americans. And that's not at all the case. We dealt with about 158 different nationalities, but the ones that were critical were the terrorists, or the supported countries that were sending terrorists or releasing people that were persona non grata into the United States, and what's happened to them, because obviously all of those people were either caught and released, or they came in with the cartels. My understanding now is that the cartels are being very active in training those Iranians that are coming out of the Iranian embassy in Mexico. And the cartels don't really care about the commodity, but we have a lot of scary things going on. Number one, with the Islamic radicals, but the other is we don't know who's here.
No, we don't. There was a lot going on. As you know, from being with us in those good times, we had a lot of undercover ops through South and Central America. And in doing that, we actually identified stops for terrorist cells all the way up through Mexico into this country. When I retired, I went to help the military in Iraq for 2 years and Afghanistan for a year. And we saw the destruction of the roadside bomb. Those same devices, although originated in Ireland, were then being used by the cartel in Juarez. So it comes full circle, and you've got to know what's going on out there and who you're letting into this country.
Well, and you and I know dealt with a lot of the things about, you can't profile, it's illegal. Yes, it is, but it's a behavioral pattern. It's a pattern of what a person is doing and frequenting, and what, you're picking up chatter and all that other stuff. And how do you divide that fine line between profiling and, making sure that I mean, I remember Sheila Jackson Lee telling me, well, we can't hurt their feelings. And I thought at one point, why are we negotiating with terrorists?
Yeah.
Where do you draw that fine line, Mike?
Well, it's not a fine line to me. I think once you identify articulable facts in pursuit of a warrant, in pursuit of whatever investigation you're doing, then you take it to the next step, and that involves arrest, detention. That's what you do. So,
And what makes Houston such a vulnerable city?
a lot of things. It's the largest big city in the U.S. close to the international border. It has all the foreign nationalities involved with it, has multi ways to, air, sea, and everything to get here. But on top of that, it also has drug traffic, money laundering, arms distribution. They have about the largest HIDA center, the high intensity drug traffic, was established here in Houston. U.S. Attorney Prosecutors takes everything from San Diego south. So it's a hub for all these, good, bad, and indifferent. We draw a lot of jobs. We draw a lot of foreign nationals. But at the same time, we have those that want to capitalize on that. hospitality.
Listen, we're going to have to cut over to a commercial break real quick because we do have sponsors we want to highlight. Thank you for waiting.
When the stakes are high, clarity matters. In today's fast-moving media environment, misinformation spreads fast, especially around immigration policy, national security, and public safety. That's where Deason Consulting Services steps in. Led by Luisa Deason, former investigative journalist, DHS and ICE subject matter expert, and certified neuro-linguistic programming practitioner, Deason Consulting equips leaders, candidates, law enforcement, and executives with clear posture, confident delivery, and fact-based messaging. From immigration policy education and media response strategy to crisis communication and executive message development, Deason Consulting helps you cut through the rhetoric and speak with authority. Whether you're preparing for a press conference, navigating a complex policy issue, or facing high-pressure media scrutiny, we prepare you to lead. Deason Consulting Services. Strategic communication, informed leadership, measured response. Contact Deason Consulting today and be ready when it matters most. Call today 832-244-2488 or email Luisa at DeasonConsultingServices.com.
When it comes to motorcycles, there's talk, and then there's real experience. At Mad Dog Moto, it's hands-on. Street bikes, dirt bikes, high-revving machines, and hard-ridden trail beasts. From routine maintenance and diagnostics to engine builds, clutch replacements, suspension upgrades, and performance tuning. Every bolt matters. Carbureted or fuel injected. Electrical troubleshooting, precision dial-ins. No shortcuts, no guesswork. Because performance means nothing without reliability, and power means nothing without safety. This isn't just wrenching, it's craftsmanship. It's knowing how a bike should feel when it's tuned right, how it should respond when you twist the throttle, and how it should hold up when you push it hard. At Mad Dog Moto, every machine gets treated like it's our own. Ready to ride stronger? Call us today at 346-404-3901. I repeat, 346-404-3901. Or email us at maddogmotoservice@gmail.com. Mad Dog Moto. Dependable, powerful, ready to up your ride.
Well, we are back. I am Luisa Deason. I am your host for Frontline Facts. We are correcting the rhetoric, and we're coming back to our guest today. So when we're hearing, have your head on a swivel when you're out and about, try to avoid crowds. What are the more critical infrastructure pieces that you can say would be targets? We already know that, but I think many people have this misconception because they don't understand.
Well, I think public transportation and one, it's wherever you gather. So public transportation would be one. I think water is one that's often overlooked. And I think we should do more on that. You see a lot of talk on that. I read it in the papers anyway, a lot of meetings being done to discuss that. But those entities that do that are satellite systems. Anything you can do to disrupt that on their part would probably be a benefit to them. Just as
Well,
we
the
used to
energy
say.
corridor, we got what else? The critical infrastructures we have a lot of refineries. We are a Texas city that really does. We're very metropolitan, and there's a lot of big giants that are critical infrastructure.
And we have a medical center. And the medical centers, I'm not just talking about the places to help people heal. I'm talking about the laboratories and the viruses they're working on. We house a lot of that here. Another critical infrastructure.
Well, that's scary. Well, what do you think is the let me just say, let's pretend you were back at your job today.
Right.
What would be some of the top three things that you would definitely change to make it easier for ICE agents to work in conjunction with other law enforcement? But what would be some of the top things that you would change to make
Well,
sure that there's collaboration and that the agents? I mean, to me, it's just absolute nuts to think that you can't go out as an agent and without being spit on and thrown rocks at, and people are shooting at you and they're driving cars into you, and you and I never saw that. That was just something we never saw.
no, they wouldn't tolerate it. I saw it a lot in the Middle East. I saw it a lot against our soldiers, and I saw what the mass stands for. If I were on the job today, and I wish I saw you at a concert with Tom, I wish I had a chance to talk to him. He's a hard guy to get through. He and I were colleagues and friends at one point, but I know he's under the gun. I would say things happened when we merged. Now, this is talking about 911. And when we merged, we left the Department of Justice. And why is that important? It's because that's where the FBI is. That's where the U.S. Attorneys is. The department lost their ability to investigate, that authority, of foreign nationals. Who has that? We do. So they ran to Congress and got extended authority and authorized to pursue violators of INA crimes. I think the tide has turned. They did that. We've seen how that's molded. And it was a little rocky at first. They, drop up, arrest people and draw, hey, are you processed? That's not the way it goes. But we've learned that since we left the department, the Bureau has something that I think is holding us back that we should pursue. And that is, I'm not talking about the ability to investigate complaints that people have against us, but we shouldn't be able to investigate the complaints that happen against our officers. We have the officer corps to do that. We have the investigators trained to do that. Ask for that authority. Let's see if that 3,000% increase on assaults on officers doesn't get some. If we start prosecuting those people, Bureau can't do everything. They have priorities as well. We need to take that. So that's be my first thing, to convince people that's our job. Let's go out and look at these people. In my opinion, I know why they're using mass. I certainly would as well. You understand it because of the assaults and all. But in the long run, is it something we would like to get away from? Absolutely. I would not want to be pursued under something like that. I certainly would like a better working environment.
Well, and of course, I think that the death threats are up to 8,000%.
Gee.
The assaults are up like 1,500%. I mean, it's just crazy. We never saw that before.
And we don't see the result. Where are the investigators? What is the
Well,
result?
and the disregard for just the fact that it's authority. It's all
Yes.
this brainwashing and this defunding the police and this wokeness and the liberal, the democratic liberal who really just is out to destroy this country. And how do you stop that in an era where we have a president that's finally provided the most secure border in 50 years? It's kind of
Right.
like, how do you continue to fight the fight when you've got all this resistance? I'd never even been introduced to anybody who was a paid agitator, for crying out loud.
Right. Now there's tens of thousands of them.
And people call me all the time to report stuff, and I'm like, you need to call ICE or you need to call your local PD.
Well,
Well, you were involved with HIDA, and there was a lot of critical groups that are in Houston because of the different and the diverse types of crimes that happen here. But we have, for example, the soccer games coming up, the FIFA games and stuff like that. And one of the things that I know is on the top of most law enforcement is the trafficking.
Sure.
And we saw a lot of children being trafficked under the Biden administration. A lot of them were unsupervised, and of course, we're still trying to recover and find a lot of them. And I say we because I still hold the agents and ICE very close to my heart and in very deep regard. But how do you start combating some of the? I mean, when you have to pick the worst of the worst, and you've got to start somewhere, where do you start?
Well, you start on the internet, in my opinion. I mean, you can work with your community groups, you can work with a variety of things, but now we have more people. Before, the state locals didn't have the authority to pursue that. Over the years, that's changed. So you have more eyes on what's going on, but you get on the internet. There was nobody better than looking at internet crime than our partners in Customs. So get that focused on that, and let's start identifying those groups. So we can do kind of Super Bowl, just like you said, was a big event for that. So you would think the soccer will be the same.
Punishing the businesses or doing something to change it, that force will always be a beacon to the illegal alien wanting to seek work.
I absolutely agree. It hasn't changed in 30, 40 years. They're two-pronged. It's the work and entitlement. You go back in history and look at the SAVE program, then you look at the I-9 program. They're addressing those needs, but there's flaws in both of them.
Well, now describe the I-9, because I know that you were instrumental in signing off on that. You helped to create that document.
I
And for many that don't understand who it is or what it is, it's the I-9 that gives you a list of the documents that you must present in order to make yourself eligible to work in the United States.
Every employee has to fill out an I-9. Even if you're an independent contractor in some form or not, you'll have to fill out employment verification. So very important document. 1986, I was promoted to deputy in Houston, coming down out of the region. And then I was assigned to Washington to lead the group that developed the document itself, the I-9. There was another group developed employees that would handle a variety of things, but it was all getting it started because we had to be operational by May 1st, 1987. So we did tens of thousands of meets and greets with local employers, from the Astrodome to the hiring halls it was endless. We just beat the streets trying to get the information out, even though it was changing. As a result of that, they awarded the contract to a Houston company to develop the I-9 identification booklet. The very first one was out of Houston. And we're very proud of that fact. At the time, what we were trying to do and go through this. So being who we are in Houston, we were very competitive. We went out, you could have a violation, serve it on an employee effective May 1st. We did that. We were the first one in the country. And that restaurant chain that we served it on was named Marcos. And at the time,
I remember.
and that time, I want to say this because at that time, the owner was a Mr. Bumbawala, I believe, who later became Employee of the Year, Small Business Manager of the Year. So it all works out well in the end. But we got up and running. We told them we'd be there for the employees. We mitigated a fine. We did a variety of things, but we had a very active program in that I-9.
Well, and in the past, I think you had mentioned that, there was a fine. And so that fine was just something that businesses expected as a way of doing business.
Eventually.
I was on board then when we started doing the prosecutions against those that were the managers and owners of those businesses that weren't correcting their problems. It was no longer a matter of a slap on the hand and saying, here's your fine. It was criminal charges.
Well, there are things that need to be done to the I-9 program, and maybe they're happening right now. I haven't seen any of them, but maybe they're happening right now. But not everyone has to use the E-Verify program, which enrolls you to look at who's lawfully here or not. So some folks don't want to use that. I do a lot of consulting after the fact over the last several years, and I found a lot of employers honestly want to comply. I won't tell the employer, but they're largest in the country, and had a chance to sit down with them and go over them. And they had a ton of people using bad documents, but they had no way to discern which was which. The E-Verify was a way to do that. E-Verify, Social Security numbers, the same thing. So the federal government needs to make sure that all employers at a certain level use E-Verify and Social Security. Social Security sends out lists of people that don't match. I was working with one company and had over 200 of them. 99% of that are illegals. There are some other criminal matters that involve other persons using fake identity, but 99% are illegals. They're duplicate numbers. And they're informing the employer to take some action. Well, the employer doesn't know what to do, has no penalty if he doesn't do anything, and he's not required to share that with Homeland Security. And Homeland Security.
I know things probably have changed a little bit. Now we do communicate with the Social Security and IRS. Is that correct?
I don't know about Social Security. There's a lot of infighting going on there. I've been watching it, but I don't think they're sending them these duplicate lists yet. And a lot of times they go through your tax agencies at the various states.
Well, it only makes sense that if you had 9/11, that the E-Verify program that was created after 9/11, that is a statute, so to speak, that every business in this country must use, big or small, in my opinion. But I mean, I'm crazy if you think that I'm going to, how do you monitor everybody else? That I mean, there are things that are common sense practices. It just something that's not mandatory doesn't make any sense at this point.
It doesn't, and it should be. That's one of the things they really should, because this one particular employer I was working with, He had a lot of loyal employers. He was loyal to his employees, trying to assist them, but they had no resolution but to terminate them. And when they did, they went right down the street to the very competitor because that person wasn't being audited and whatnot. It's very frustrating for people that are trying to do that. They need to make sure everyone uses that system so that they can go after these persons that are trying to simplify things.
Well, and I know that we used to do a lot of worksite enforcement, but at some point, I can't remember under what president we were under, that division at the service was not only abolished, but we stopped doing worksite enforcement. And I'm not sure what year it was, but it was kind of like that just doesn't make any sense to abolish a program that goes after and makes sure that everybody's in compliance.
Right. And you can do that through auditors and whatnot. When you talk to the general public, they think of raids when you say that. So they're not.
And one of the things I educate a lot of people on, Mike, yeah, I know you do too, because you and I are kind of the same crop. We use the same verbiage, but we would correct people when they'd say it's raids because these are worksite enforcement investigative actions that have taken
Right.
months and
Yes.
months and months and months to investigate. Usually it's somebody who's a whistleblower on the inside or somebody that calls in a tip. And so it's not just the drivers, agents driving down the freeway at random, stopping and saying, let's stop here. These are months of investigations that take place to even begin those worksite enforcement investigations.
No, it is. A lot of effort goes into it, and you're usually armed with a warrant, which is something people like to complain about in some of our searches.
Well, so that's one of the driving forces. Now let's go into a lot of the things. I know it falls under the purview DOJ or USCIS now, Citizenship and Immigration Services. But the perspective of foreign nationals that come in, you're a guest in this country when you come in on a visa as a foreign student, and you must carry 12 hours. I was out with, agents teaching the colleges after 9/11 what the requirements were for those visas and how they must stay in compliance and what we were trying to do in educating these large universities to stay compliant. And when there were abnormalities or people fell out of status to report that. But I mean, what did you see from the investigative side that was really frustrating? And of course, seeing what's going on and what happened under the Biden administration with all these people that are protesting on these university grounds, and you think you cannot protest on that kind of a visa. It's no longer freedom of speech. If your rhetoric is you hate America and you don't want to comply with the laws and regulations in this
You need
country,
to go
you
home.
don't merit being here.
Right. You need to go home. It's simple as that. All of these, I think it's frustrating. We see and we read in the media and we talk to each other about our problems at the borders, all the borders. But what we don't spend a lot of time talking about is that the number of people that arrive on visas and don't go home. They overstay their visa. Even from people with visa waiver programs, they overstay all those things. And then there's no real effort to go locate them. And I think that's changing. You see a little bit where they're trying to pick up people and people get mad that, well, you're not going after the worst of the worst. Well, we are. But in that process, if we identify others there illegally, we're not just going to leave them. We're going to take them as well. That's what the law pays us to do.
Well, and how do you explain to someone, a lot of times I'll get somebody who tells me, well, they're not really law enforcement. They don't have arrest authority. I'm thinking these may be civil cases we're dealing with. At times it's criminal, but yes, they have the authority. These ICE agents have the authority to arrest, investigate, the carry a weapon. I mean, they're federal law enforcement agents. So how do you squash that rumor?
Well, you need a big sign. I'm just as frustrated as you when I read articles and whatnot, because they miss it all the time. Civil cases. These are criminal violations when you come without inspection. It is a misdemeanor the first time. It can be a felony the second time if you're removed. But the fact is a criminal violation. But because there's so many of them, perhaps that'll change now with the border more secure. But there's so many of them, you clog down the source of. So an administrative violation. You do the same things in criminal courts in the states all the time. But these are criminal cases.
Well, and the thing that you bring to light is very interesting because a lot of people will say, well, I just entered illegally. That's not a crime. Yes, it is. It's a violation of Title 8, Section 1325.
Absolutely.
And then, of course, if they obtain a fraudulent document at the flea market to work and they work on that document in excess of 180 days and then stay 180 days in excess of their entry, without adjusting or doing something. That's like 3 or 4 crimes already bunched up together. And then when they're asked to leave under their own recognizance and they don't, and that final order is given, that's what those agents are going out and arresting. And people will go, well, that poor person was here 20 years, but that poor person has spent 20 years without a way to adjust, most likely. And the second part is they've committed crimes in their staying here and working here illegally.
Well, I don't know how much time you have or not, but that's the whole problem. I was also here. I was the director as the deputy of the amnesty program. And we had the largest single volume site in the country in Houston, over 150,000 people. I'd say the first 85,000 were legit cases. After that, got into a lot of fraud, and they absconded. They went all over the places. But the people who would complain to us the most about that, I suspect, are the same people that are objecting to the students who were brought here unknowingly, that kind of thing, is that they went through the process legally. They went through the longest. Some of those people are still waiting. So they don't like to have someone awarded for illegal behavior put to the front of the line. And I understand that.
Well, and that's just rewarding the person who hasn't done this correctly. I was born and raised in Mexico. I got here legally with an American mother and a Mexican father. And my father came in through the airport and had stamped his passport as a legal permanent resident. But one of the things that I think is happening is the fear of what the media has created. And of course, nobody believes the media. I certainly don't. I don't believe that their rhetoric is correct. And that's one of the reasons why I launched this podcast,
Right.
was to correct the rhetoric and make sure people have a great understanding of what's really going on. When people call ICE agents Nazis and fascists and things like that, it's like they are fathers and husbands and brothers and sisters, and they have families that they go home to every night, and they don't
Or want to.
they want to go home.
Right.
Well, I hope
They got to,
I
no,
hope
they got to
want
protect them.
to.
Well, I mean, they want to. There's that danger out there every time they go out.
Well, and this thing about, unmask and then mask, and they can't arrest. When we'd never seen anything like that. What happened in Minnesota?
No.
I don't know. It's just become a very crazy, the sense of entitlement, I think, and the belief that the rhetoric has changed to convince people that it's not a crime to be here illegally, I think, is where we start.
Well,
It's
it
got to
is.
be boots on the ground. It has to be through educational pieces out in the communities. And of course, now is a critical time, because with all the candidate work that I'm doing, a lot of people fear that if Texas falls to the liberal Democrat, that will become a socialist state. And of course, the concern at the national level is if Texas goes, the rest of the country goes.
Right.
So what else can you share with us today, Mike? You have been a wealth of
Well-
information, and you're always you're always in tune with what are the major changes and things of that nature. But what other things have we not
Well,
covered that we should probably cover?
Immigration in general, if I could have a minute. We have
Floor
a,
is yours.
we have a great deal of knowledge here of immigration through lawyers, through persons that practice it, through agents, through a variety of things on both sides of the aisle. It's got to be a compromise. We've gone too long without an immigration bill. The parties themselves align with this. Well, this is another voting block. This is another voting block, perhaps, but maybe we can neutralize that in some cases. But we all have to agree that you have to have a secure border. You have to have everyone registered. We have to know who's here. And then through that process of identification, we identify where these workers are and which companies need them, and allow for that to happen, as long as they don't have criminal records, allow for that to happen. We have to have some resolve on the immigration issue.
Well, and the other thing is, a lot of people scream about the due process was not given. Yes, it was. It's very different. A lot of people don't understand that due process is very different. It depends on whether you're encountered at the border. There's also expedited removal. Can you explain some of that to our listening public today?
Which is expedited removal?
Expedited removal, and the fact that due process is granted when someone is either before an inspector or an agent, and
yes.
or there's some sort of a legal action. Everybody thinks that everybody has to show up in court, and that's the biggest misconception. I think we need to clarify that.
Yeah, but many times the decision makers, when you have that, is that they are offered a court appearance. Get into which varieties that it, but they're offered, if there's adversarial action going forward, meaning a denial of entry, they are offered to go before a judge. Well, when will that happen? How will it be changed? That's a very lengthy process. And many of them don't want that when they know they can go and try again without canceling. So uh, there's a method for everyone. I hear this all the time. And when I served, I did as well as that, you guys are just rushed to the well. By law, we have to explain X, Y, Z, what their rights are. We have to assert that we do that and get a witness to it. So I don't know who's fooling who, but there's a lot of fact checks going on to make sure everyone's taken care of.
Well, and I think a lot of people don't understand that depending on the country you're from, depends on what the process looks like for your repatriation.
I agree.
Obviously, Mexicans are going to be easier, Central Americans, but everybody has to have a travel document if they're not somebody across directly from the opposite side of the border. And sometimes those documents aren't readily available. Sometimes those flights only travel once or twice a month. And so there's a lot of dynamics that go into removing someone, and to remove the masses of what they think is here in this country is monumental. And I think that's why we see such aggressive enforcement actions. But give me your perspective on that.
Well, sometimes outside of our control, other factors happen, but this is still the greatest country in the world. That's why everyone wants to come in. And by everyone, I mean 75% of the world. You look at the apprehension data from the Border Patrol every month, the number of nationalities is 130, 140. So everyone wants to come here. Recently, let's say 10 years, Mexico dropped the visa requirements for Brazilians. Well, Brazilians jumped on that in a heartbeat because they could transit all the way to the border without a visa and then enter illegally. Well, we tracked about 600,000 of them that did that very thing and ended up on, most of them, believe it or not, in Orlando and up on the East Coast and things of that nature. So there are other factors that the draw is always the employment and the benefits and the security of the USA, but other factors enter how that comes about. And that's just one example of
Well,
how
an asylum.
asylum. Asylums.
Asylum is just probably the most fraud-riddled program that exists, because the problem is there are certain requirements. You have to be fleeing your country for fear of political persecution or religious. It's never about a tornado or a hurricane or an economic fallback.
No.
And what we saw at the border during the Biden administration was just the masses coming in and seeking asylum. But it was catch and release, so you really don't get to capture who's here because they're never going to show up in court. And asylum cases, from my understanding, is about 90% or 95% are erroneous, and they're not going to be able to. Now, asylum doesn't qualify you to get asylum in the United States if you don't meet the requirements, first and foremost. But if you've lived in 2 or 3 other countries and you had legal permanent residence or were dropping documents at the border,
Or even passed through and didn't file for asylum. So there's other remedies there. TPS, temporary protected status. Well, what is temporary about permanent? Nothing. You came here because of some conflict, some weather disaster. I can think of particularly the El Sal's. They had a war in the 80s and they were fleeing in mass. But what we saw in Houston was all males. Well,
yes, that's true.
where are your families? I'm sorry. How do we treat our soldiers that want to abandon? Not the same. So you have to look at the big picture. But I think if you want to be abused this country, then we need to tighten things up, and we need to make sure that we allow the immigration process lawfully to go forward.
Well, and I think that's why 75 different types of visas have been either paused or canceled at the time. But give me your perspective on what is our biggest threat today.
It's not, if in terms of nationalities, I'd have to say it's Middle Easterners. I was over there. We saw how long that process took to strike back at America. I worry when I see that we're in conflict, a war with Iran, because I worked the Iranian hostage crisis in this country. We were rounding up Iranians in Oklahoma and other places. Believe it or not, Oklahoma had the largest number of Iranian students because of all the flight schools there and whatnot.
Oh, that's scary.
Yes, it is. So there are a lot of those people that have been here a long time. And I wonder if we're not going to, at some point in time, see something occur because our current status.
Well, my biggest fear is having car bombs in the middle of the day. Don't you remember the days where there were loads of aliens that were robbing each other's loads in the middle of the day, and they're having shootouts in the middle of the freeway in daylight?
Yeah.
I mean, what we don't want is that radical individual who really believes that, they can come in, not acclimate into our society and then do us harm. They're burning flags. The rhetoric states that they want death to America. And of course, I think the state legislator is trying to make a push to try to get behind something that will change the way that they protect each other when they open up all these mosques. I believe Texas has over 500 mosques. And I'm not saying everybody's bad, but if you're going to hide, if you're going to do this country harm and you're going to hide behind the sheet of freedom of religion, there has to be some sort of balances and checks and balances that happen to avoid another 9/11 on a much, much larger scale.
I agree with you. I absolutely agree with you. I get these requests all the time about such things as birthright citizenship and stuff like that. I've seen the abuses firsthand at the border and in the Caribbean, how that comes to pass. They load up on boats and end up with bags, and I would turn them around. I did then. I do it now if I had access to it. But they're carrying baby clothes. They're going home. I know what they're about to do. So I wish them a lot of luck in handling that matter.
Yeah. Well, Mike, I can't thank you enough. I want to go ahead and just close out, but we will certainly appreciate your knowledge. And of course, I appreciate the relationship you and I have had. We've known each other for many, many years. Our families are like family to one another. And I just want to make sure that everybody understands that, you are an expert in your field. And I truly appreciate your time with us this afternoon.
And yours, and I wish you and others like you succeed in this endeavor.
Well, I think there's opportunity for both moving forward, and we're working on several things. And I want to thank you very much. And of course, this concludes our episode here with Frontline Facts. I'm your host, Luisa Deason. Until next time, we'll see you soon.